Hello, everybody. This is a very special week and a special conversation that we're going to have with Tina, who is one of our board of directors. She has close to 2 decades of experience, and she is looked up to everywhere as having broken the bias, and that too in the automotive industry, which is highly skewed towards the male employee base. What we're going to speak today about with Tina, and get her thoughts and some of the perspectives is on women are followers and they're not leaders. And my name is Arun Jaura. I am the Chief Technical Officer for Hero Motor Corp, and I'm really delighted and honored to have Tina with us today to share her thoughts. So Tina, over to you. I just want to sort of say, you have such an illustrious journey so far in different continents across the globe. And if you can share your journey with us, both on the personal side and on the professional side, that'll be great.
Sure. Thanks so much, Arun. And I'm absolutely delighted to be here. So let me share a little bit on the personal side. So I'm the youngest of 3 daughters, and I grew up in a middle-class family in Delhi. My father was in a management role with MTNL, which was the government telecom firm, the telecom operator. And my mother was a high school mathematics teacher. And from a very early age, the importance of education was really spoken about a lot around the dinner table. And our parents really reinforced for the 3 of us, the importance of hard work, the importance of making the most of the educational opportunity that we were getting. And I think it was their belief right at that time itself that prevented a lot of the biases and stereotypes from even entering our minds. So I'll elaborate a little bit on that. As I said, my mother was a high school math teacher. So given that she was a high school math teacher, just the idea that any of her daughters would not enjoy math or find math just absolutely beautiful did not even cross her mind, right? That was just a non-negotiable. And my father had while he was in a management role, he had a science background himself. And he brought that lens of scientific thinking, I think, even to parenting, which meant that he always believes in logic, and he believes in data and evidence. So anytime the question or even a phrase such as girls do this or women do this and women don't do this came up, he kind of brushed it aside completely as it being completely devoid of fact and evidence. And I think I'm just really, really grateful for having that initial start in my life where a lot of these biases and stereotypes just did not pervade inside the home. In the early 1990s, I had decided that, voiced my desire to my parents to actually pursue my undergraduate studies in the United States. And that wasn't very common at that time at all, and especially so for women. And I think once again, my father's logical brain took over and he developed a rubric for me. And he said, all right, well, you know what? There are a lot of great colleges and great universities in India. So if we are to make the sacrifice of you being away from us, it has to be a university or a college that we cannot hold you back away from. So that kind of gave me that rubric of, okay, this is the pool of universities that I could apply to. And his second rubric point was, and look, we're a middle-class family with limited resources. So in addition to convincing the admissions office to admit you, you also need to convince them to give you the financial aid. And so with that rubric, and he smiled at me at that time, I still remember, and he said, but you know what, you're up for this challenge, so go for it and just work hard. If this is truly your dream and this is truly your passion, work hard for it. And I think that was a key point right then itself. So I was fortunate at that time that I did get admission to MIT, and my parents agreed that it was an opportunity that I should not say no to. And I went there, and that was another eye-opening experience. I mean, it was an incredibly intense experience. It was an incredibly hard in many ways academically. It really challenged me, put me out of my comfort zone. I remember at some times, I used to compare it to the chakra view, if you could borrow a metaphor from the Mahabharata, where you can enter it, right. But then you're kind of figuring out, well, I got in, how do I manage to get out in one piece? So that was the experience over there. But, again, over there, since we're talking around the topic of breaking biases, what I noticed in that institution again was the only thing you were judged on, the only thing you were graded on, the only thing you were assessed on was the quality of your thoughts, the quality of your work. Just the kind of effort that you put in, and if you were able to make a difference. It didn't matter what your background was, it didn't matter what your socioeconomic status was, your ethnicity, or your gender. If you were capable and you had the discipline to work and you had the desire to learn, the opportunities were limitless over there.
Fantastic.
And so again, just in terms of that background, I might have been a little fortunate on that side. Should I continue with the professional side?
Absolutely. This is so inspiring. I just want to keep hearing. I'm sure the audience will love this.
Okay.
They're loving it already.
Thank you. Well, so now let me get to the part where I started experiencing the first set of biases or the first set of stereotypes, right? So I'm about to finish college and I'm starting to think about, okay, where's my next step? What career do I want to get into? What kind of job do I want to be doing? And I had a degree in economics and I was interested in joining financial services. And at that time, I was particularly interested in trading. And the interest in trading probably came from, reading some books around it. I knew it was going to be exciting. I knew it was going to be fast-paced. I knew it was going to be challenging and tough with all of these constant mental calculations, etc., that you're doing. And it was going to be, as I said, a steep learning curve in learning about companies and learning about financial instruments. And I must have voiced this to some friends, and the reaction was intense, right? The reaction was like, are you crazy? Like, have you completely lost your mind? Have you ever been to a trading floor? Have you noticed what the level of aggression on a trading floor is? Are you up for it? You're going to be eaten up alive. So I heard all of those things, and they made me doubt myself. And so several weeks later, after an interview process, when I actually had an offer at a trading firm and I stepped on a trading floor for the first time before accepting the job and actually just looking around, I wasn't there out of excitement. I wasn't feeling the excitement. I was actually feeling the apprehension. And I was feeling the apprehension because I had let those biases get through to me. So I was looking around and I was just saying, oh my goodness, this is going to be a mistake, because all I'm seeing is that what seemed to me to be aggression. All I'm seeing is at that time, like, wow, am I going to be confident enough? Am I going to be able to own my space over here? And that made me decide at that time that, maybe I'm not cut out for this. So this was probably the first instance where I saw that bias creep up, and I saw that bias then manifest itself within myself. I did hold on to my interest in working in financial services, though. So I went and I got a job on Wall Street in an investment bank. And it was a great learning. And quite frankly, at my level, which was the entry level, I would say the class was almost fairly evenly divided between men and women. It might have been a 60-40 ratio.
Right.
The one thing that was very, very evident, right, looking at that bank or looking at other banks on Wall Street, was that while your entry class might have been fairly evenly divided, there was a massive drop off in the number of women as women went through the ranks. And it clearly wasn't due to performance or capability, because, we could see in the entry class that women were performing just as well, or in cases better than their male counterparts. So it really had to be something else.
Interesting.
And yeah, absolutely. And this was the late 1990s, right? So, and I think women had to, at that time, really deal with a lot of the conscious and subconscious biases that I think they still do. And when you're in banking, a lot of times, or you're in those kinds of related fields, those kinds of biases are often linked to, well, are you going to have them? Are you going to have what it takes to survive? Are you going to have what it takes to thrive? Are you going to be able to go out there and pitch business and be competitive enough and win? Are you going to be able to hold your own on a negotiating table? So there are those biases for sure, and I could sense those, especially as one rose through the ranks in financial services at that time.
Absolutely, and it's not, like you said, it's not an easy floor to be on. Trust me, and I believe that, and I can imagine that as well. But as you were doing this, how were you managing it, or how were you handling these biases that comes from mind right away? And how was your support system in terms of family, friends, sort of helping you in the ecosystem, in the support system, to sort of get over these biases, or at least give you some pointers?
Yeah.
Because you said you're and especially out of college or university, you're very young.
Yep.
You're just
Yeah.
like very young, getting into this big world of professional corporate life.
Yeah.
And then how do you manage that?
Yeah. And I think over here, right, I'm really grateful to my parents, to my friends, to colleagues, to my husband. Again, really reminding yourself about, look, you're here for a reason.
Hmm.
Right? Very often, it's very easy when those biases trickle in for someone to say, am I here out of a fluke? Like, did I just get, was there just magical fate or destiny that landed me here? And I think, again, I'm grateful to family, I'm grateful to friends, I'm grateful to colleagues for often just stepping in at those moments and just reminding me and saying, look, you've done your part to get here.
Hmm.
Right? You've done your part to get here. You've earned this spot.
Absolutely,
Right?
absolutely, fantastic,
And now you have to make the most of that opportunity that you have.
fantastic. So, this conversation today is kind of focusing around women are followers and not leaders. So, if sort of, it sort of stares in everybody's face today. And how do you see this? What does this mean to you? And I go back to what I mentioned a few minutes ago, and with your illustrious journey in different continents around the globe, I'm sure you have a large perspective to share with us this today.
Absolutely. Um, I think as you mentioned with this bias of women are followers and not leaders, I think just like any other bias, this bias too is completely void of any logic or even evidence. So I think as we've seen and we've spoken earlier, right, there is data out there that actually talks about how women have actually proven themselves time and time again to actually be better leaders, and particularly better leaders in terms of crises. There is a term that we've been talking about, which is the glass cliff, which is which comes after the glass ceiling. So after women have done the work of actually breaking through the glass ceiling, there is this glass cliff that they are sometimes handed. And the glass cliff is pretty much, when you've got an organization that's going through a crisis and it needs a leader, and you pick a woman, or a woman is picked for that role, because it's such a high risk role that everybody else is actually stepping away from it. And we've seen this happen in recent times, several times over. Again, when it's such a high risk role that the probability of failure is just too high. We've seen this recently in the UK post Brexit. Right, when you had David Cameron step back, and you had a lot of the other leaders step back, and it was Theresa May who stepped forward, and it truly was a glass cliff at that time. The country was going to go through so much upheaval at that time that it really was going to be a role that everybody knew, was going to be filled with landmines in many ways. You've also seen that in other roles. So, since our hearts are so close to the automotive industry, one of the examples that comes up so strongly is that of Mary Barra of General Motors. When she took over General Motors, soon after, they had the switchgate controversy with ignition switches, which had even had fatalities. And there was, General Motors at that time was going through one of its toughest periods in history. A lot of people expected that she would falter, but instead of faltering, I think she really rose to the challenge. She showed her mettle. She showed the power of her leadership. She showed how she, the way she demonstrated her leadership is actually a case study for others. The way she turned around the organization, the way she made the organization an organization that is looked up to for trust and communication, also again shows how she made the most of that crisis. So I think, again, coming back to what you said about women, the bias of women being followers and not leaders is really a myth. And it's a myth that unfortunately gets perpetuated without any evidence and without the data to back it.
How do you think this sort of originates, and what do you think the notion is behind this? Is it because of the different sort of percentages in the ecosystem in terms of the gender diversity, or what do you think is actually causing this, or at least starting to create a myth around this?
Yeah. What's starting to create, I think one thing that does happen is very often people tend to pick the leaders, or they tend to pick people in those leadership positions based on either the fact that, hey, I can relate to this person, or they are being chosen for that position based on the charisma that they are bringing to the role. This is the charisma, the outspokenness, the kind of larger than life personas very often are associated with male figures rather than female figures, who tend to be more decisive, who tend to be more consensus driven, who tend to be really focused on enhancing engagement, but also tend to be on the quieter side, perhaps on a relative basis. And I think this is one of the things that perpetuates that myth. The other thing that perpetuates this myth, again, is sometimes, and there are certain examples out there where, again, people or in the workforce, women are sometimes being held up to a much higher bar than their male counterparts. So I'll give you an example of this. When you going back in time, when you think about scientists who have had really a profound impact on research and development, one of the few female names that comes up is Madame Curie, Marie Curie, right? Who was behind isolating radioactive isotopes. And she is one of the very, very few people who has received not just one Nobel Prize, but 2 Nobel Prizes. Yeah. And so the question arises, right, that when you had Marie Curie, why do you not have other equally well-recognized female scientists in the world? And it's often referred to, as I understand, the Marie Curie effect. And the unintended consequence of her success was that when women scientists approached colleges and universities for positions, for faculty positions or for research positions, they were immediately compared to Marie Curie, right? And they were immediately compared to the brilliance of Marie Curie, and more often than not, they fell short. And they were denied those positions. The ones who did get those positions ended up having to work longer hours for lesser pay than their male counterparts and effectively work themselves into the ground. Now, here's the thing. The male scientists who were applying for those same kinds of positions weren't being compared to an Isaac Newton or an Albert Einstein or even a Stephen Hawking.
That's so unfair.
Right? It is an unfair comparison, right? They were just being allowed to be themselves and to contribute at the level that they could. And I think, if you compare every budding, taking that same logic forward, if you compare every budding female manager to an Indira Nui, or if you compare every aspiring lawyer to a Zia Modi, they're going to fall short. Yeah. Right. And it's a little bit of sometimes setting up the bar, setting that bar so high at the very, very beginning for women to say, jump over it.
Oh my God. Yes. And, since you mentioned a couple of Indian names or Indian origin names who've done very well, globally, I think, a little bit of zoom on India. What do you think are the typical biases that you see from your vantage point in India?
As I see it, the biases that we see in India is that women are still expected to wear many, many hats. Right? Even as they are working, they're still expected to be the primary caregiver and the primary nurturer. And that's, especially during the pandemic, has been an enormous responsibility. And I would even go on to say an enormous burden on a lot of these women. One of the things that we have been that I heard very recently someone say was that when you look at the workforce and the number of women who have had to leave the workforce during the pandemic, looking at those numbers, particularly in the Indian context, should make us weep. And that is true. It really should make us weep, because it just feels like we have fallen so many years behind, because of the biases and because of how those biases have come even further to fruition during this pandemic.
Right. Yes.
Right. Women have been expected to not only continue to perform and even outperform in their jobs, but also continue to shoulder the lion's share, if not the entire share, of child raising, as well as household management, as well as elder care. And that takes a toll, Arun.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And it's not easy. I mean, although women are considered to be better multitaskers than men, it can be really, really difficult, actually.
Yeah.
So a couple more questions. I know I've taken a lot of your time, Tina, but if I can take a couple of more minutes.
Sure.
What do you think it will take for all of us, just not men or women, to shatter these biases and sort of get an even play field for everybody, not only in the professional world, but also on the personal sides, on our family sides, et cetera.
Arun, I think my generation is so grateful to the women in the previous generations who really threw open the door for us to be able to go out and pursue our dreams and follow our ambitions and our careers. If they hadn't fought the fight, this option would not have existed for us. And so very often I do feel that, we are where we are because the generation before us fought that fight. And now, when someone in my generation talks about pursuing a career or having an ambition, there are no eyebrows raised because they did all of that for us.
Right.
Going in the spirit of paying it forward, I believe that the onus is on my generation now to shatter all the biases that exist so that those do not go forward, so that the next generation has an even playing field. And I think what we need to do systematically as a society, as organizations, as countries, is really address each one of those biases that still continue to stay. So for instance, I'm a mother, I have 2 sons and a daughter, and I consider it my responsibility that the 3 of them understand, know, and fully appreciate that gender equality is part of their DNA. Right? The very aspect that one of them can do something that the other one of the opposite gender cannot do should not even enter their mind. Right? They have to be looking at themselves as equally capable, and really letting what their own hard work is, what their own desires are, what their own ambitions are, be the only metric that decides how far they go. And I think that is so very important for this generation. I'd love to share an anecdote here if I can. And it was a few years ago, and my middle son at that time was 8 years old, and he was playing in a squash tournament, one of his early squash games. And he was playing with another girl, and in the under 9 category, they're still around kind of the same size, so they do it in a mixed group with girls and boys both. And he lost, and of course he was disappointed, and he shook hands with her, and he comes out of the court. And he noticed some other boys sniggering and kind of like making a comment to him like, "Oh, you lost to a girl." And we're driving back home, and I could see that he looked a little upset. And I asked him, "Are you okay?" And he said, "I lost, and yeah, that sucks. No one likes losing, but I just don't get what's the big deal if I lost to a girl. She just played better than I did."
Right.
And it was that moment, Arun, that I realized also that a 7-year-old and 8-year-old, they have no comprehension of this gender divide. They have no comprehension of these biases. It's us who put these biases in their minds, right? And it's just, at that level, all they're thinking of is, this one performed better on a given day, this one deserved to win, and so be it.
Fantastic, and that's so genuine coming from a child, because I think as they grow up, it's the people around them, the environment around them that sort of puts all this in their heads. So I want to ask you one last question, and again, this has been very interesting. I wish we could carry on for a lot more time, and I know your time is very precious. So, what would be one piece of advice that you would give the females, the younger ones, right in the middle of the careers, or a little up there, everywhere, whether it's India or overseas, to break the bias? What would that one magic bullet be, if it is there?
Yeah. It would be, remember why you are where you are. It's been through your hard work. It's been through your commitment. And stay true to yourself. Continue to lean in. Continue to make the most of the opportunities that you have.
Fantastic. I mean, we couldn't capture it better than that. But thank you very much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for
Thank
this
you so much for having me.
fantastic conversation, and superb thoughts. I mean, I think this really came out genuinely from your heart and your experiences. I think we will all benefit a lot out of this. Just not the women, but also the guys. And thank you, and have a lovely day. And see you later.
Thank you so much.